Hello and welcome back to the World Leader Leaderboard, the podcast where we tell you who's winning and losing in politics each week. This week I'm joined by Ben.
Hello.
Zach.
Hello.
And Rory.
Hello.
How are we doing? We're doing
Excellent.
Great.
Yeah.
Off to a great start. This is how the leaderboard looks right now. This is our ranking of a whole bunch of world leaders. There's so many people on the board these days, ranked based on their own personal political objectives as to how well they're doing at the moment. In today's episode, we will be moving 3 people up and 3 people down based on our winners and losers, and we'll also be discussing your additional suggestion. So let's get straight into it, and let's start with the losers this week. Rory, you can go first. Who is your loser of the week?
My loser of the week is Donald Trump, the US president. As ever with Trump, there's 1,000 things that we could move him for, foreign policy stuff, domestic stuff. But the thing I'm focusing on is the stuff that's been happening in Minnesota and the sort of recent events that have occurred there. So he's a loser for this because I think what has been demonstrated in the last few days is that what has happened in Minnesota, or in Minneapolis in particular, where this Operation Metro Surge, it was called, this surge of federal immigration officers into the city, I think 3,000 of them, has massively backfired on Trump. It was sort of, other cities have had these sort of surges, and they're meant to be sort of displays of force, as well as sort of efforts to sort of take and deport people. The big news from Minneapolis was obviously the 2 fatal shootings by sort of federal immigration officers of, firstly, Renee Good, and then I think a few days or maybe a week later of Alex Pretty. The Trump administration initially responded to those shootings, sort of trying to smear the victims as violent, sort of intent on harming or killing federal officials. But there were multiple angles of both incidents, videos shared widely and spread very, very widely, that just completely contradicted the Trump administration's claims. And he's now started to walk back on the kind of things that some of his officials have said, sort of expressing regret about the incidents, saying there needs to be an investigation. And I think that is a result of him seeing just how unpopular what has been happening in Minneapolis is, not just there, but across the country. His approval rating, net approval, according to Nate Silver, is approaching -15, which is about as low as it's been throughout this term. Specifically on immigration, it's down to -12.4, which is, again, as low as it's been this term. It's not just among Democrats and people on the left that Trump is losing his sort of approval or becoming more unpopular. It's independents as well, and that's obviously a crucial group. So in response to this, Trump has pulled out this guy called Greg Bovino, who is the sort of, I think they called him the commander at large of Border Patrol. I don't even think that's an official position. Sure. But he was so present. He'd go out in this big sort of double-breasted military jacket, surrounded by agents, sweeping through the city. Very deliberate sort of aesthetic that he's going for. And he's now been pulled out of Minneapolis after all of this. And Trump sent his border czar, Tom Homan, to talk with Tim Walz, the Democratic governor of Minnesota. And Trump is now saying he's going to try and de-escalate the situation. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it is a clear sign that he is trying to sort of pull back on what's been happening there. And I think sort of second to that is that's obviously what ICE and the Border Patrol people have been doing in Minneapolis. But the other part of the story is what the people of Minneapolis have been doing. And it's this sort of remarkable like civil resistance that's been going on there that I don't think we've seen yet in Trump's administration, where they've sort of set up this reverse surveillance state where you've got so many people out on the streets monitoring and tracking the deployment of immigration officials. It's very decentralized, but it is also very sort of disciplined. And there's a really good article in The Atlantic by a journalist who did a ride along with some of these people to see what it was like. And I think he was actually like a war correspondent at one point. So he had this quite interesting take comparing it to like Arab Spring uprisings and stuff. But yeah, so it's an example of sort of US citizens coming together and sort of inflicting a defeat on Trump. And I think that is big, not just because of that policy that's sort of being walked back a bit, but it sort of demonstrates that the Trump administration isn't as strong as they like to make out. Because I do think a big part of these federal immigration surges are about doing a sort of display of strength, and they've sort of accidentally messed up, I think, on this one.
Trump moving down from the middle of the board, the perfectly neutral section, to the lightly negative section. This isn't the only Trump rollback we've seen in recent days. It seems to be an increasingly common occurrence, be that his kind of overtures towards Greenland, and like his supporters likely would claim that he got a great success in the deal, but the deal is hardly a deal. A lot, like essentially they're getting access to military bases they could have already had in return for, I don't know, embarrassing themselves on the world stage and like cutting off all their allies. I mean, even other remarks he made at Davos, he rolled back his kind of claims about the fact that NATO had never supported him, his claims about kind of British soldiers during Afghanistan. Like, it's becoming an increasingly common occurrence that Trump is kind of rolling back claims, some kind of more publicly and more notably than others. Why do we think that is? Like, Trump of old would have kind of battened down the hatches and kind of kept fighting, be that kind of domestically or kind of internationally. I mean, there's certain areas where he clearly has always been receptive to kind of pushback, but is he getting kind of beaten down a bit more these days? Is he kind of resisting less?
You go. Well, I was going to say, I think he's basically responsive to two things. One is his approval ratings, and the other is the economy. And Zach, I assume you're going to say something about the sort of.
I actually wasn't. I wasn't going to say that. Oh, okay. I think that I think the interesting thing about quite a lot of this, I think it reflects a persistent dynamic in that administration, which is that Trump is actually quite a savvy politician, always has been, has a good nose for a vibe shift. And I think that what happens quite a lot of the time is he gets sort of encouraged on by the more radical elements within his administration, goes too far, they go too far as well. And then Trump is the one who goes, guys, the politics of this are really, really bad, right? So like, I think the Greenland thing, I think that is led by Trump, but I think also it's encouraged by the sort of the people who hate NATO and hate the Europeans, right? Hegseth and Vance. Vance was very keen on it, right? And then I think Trump realized, oh, this actually isn't a great look. This one, I think you see, I mean, you saw this very explicitly in the rhetoric, right? You see that this is being driven, obviously, by Stephen Miller and to a lesser extent, Kristi Noem. And those were the two who, in the aftermath of the shooting, they described Pretty, I mean, incredibly implausibly as a domestic terrorist, right? And you could see Trump, even in his original True Social posts, he was never quite comfortable with that sort of language, right? And I think he always had a nose for the politics that's being like, this is not good politics. Yeah. And you saw in the days afterwards, his press secretary said, you know, Trump has never used the words domestic terrorist. His deputy attorney general went to Fox News and said, we don't think, the administration does not want to use those terms, right? And I think what you're actually seeing is a sort of recurrent issue where I think some people in his administration push him into places, into certain sort of political positions that are actually too nasty, basically. And Trump has to sort of pull it back himself, right? Because I think he has just a better nose for politics than the people in his administration, right? Like, you know, Stephen Miller would never win an election on his own terms. JD Vance probably won't either, right? It's Trump actually does have a better nose for that sort of thing. So I think that what you're really seeing there, and the reason that he's drawing back, is that I think, especially compared to his first term, right, when we all thought he was dumbing down the whole time, it's because he never ended up in such extreme policy positions. Whereas what I think is happening in his second term is that the real radicals in the administration are pushing him to places that he's probably not entirely comfortable with. Or that at least because of the electoral implications. And then he's the one pulling it back, right?
And as Rory says, the things that he is maybe most responsive to are the data on the economy and polling. And both of those are broadly not looking good at the moment. He's kind of got less bandwidth in both regards, that like, as soon as it starts turning, he kind of has to be a bit quicker to react and a bit quicker to back down potentially, because it's already not looking great.
Yeah, I think it's tough. I think, you know, if you're Trump, it's not really obvious what I think you can do to turn the electoral tide in the next few months. I think in some countries you can sort of see, in some circumstances, you can sort of see obvious electoral moves. But I don't think Trump really has any of those available at the moment. I mean,
I was going to say I think he's going to Iowa to do a sort of cost of living affordability speech. And it's funny, after not the midterms, last year's off-year elections, we did expect there to be this big shift towards affordability. And for a moment there was. And then Greenland and Minneapolis, that took up the spotlight again. Now it seems like he's drifting back towards that. But again, I just don't think that will last, nor will it actually be.
Yeah, it's hard to see it's a
winning
message he's super compelling on.
Yeah.
Like, certainly versus the Democrats, I feel like he has less credibility in that area, hence him pushing towards kind of other distractions, if you want to call them that.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to see a lot of the ICE stuff. I think it's not the exclusive motivation. Again, I think people like Stephen Miller are motivated by very genuine, concerns feels like a polite way of putting it about immigration. But I think Trump is at least partly motivated by electoral things, right? He knows that he polls better. And one of the things I would say, by the way, is that, we look at all these polls about Trump's approval rating on immigration. His net approval rating is falling. His approval rating on immigration is also falling. But it is worth noting that when you ask Americans which party they trust more on the issue of immigration, Republicans still hold a very solid lead, right? So even if Americans in aggregate, or the median American disapproves of Trump's immigration policies, it is worth noting that they disapprove more still of the Democrats.
And very quickly before we move on, we've obviously touched on the economics. That also isn't looking good for Trump at the moment. We've released a couple of videos on this topic. Should he be worried about that?
What I think is really interesting, I think in some ways the economics don't look great, right? Inflation is still above target. I think there are quite a lot of reasons to think that inflation will go up in the coming year, basically. I think mainly fiscal stimulus, right? The Trump administration is still running a massive deficit, right? 6% of GDP. That's a wartime deficit. This is, well, not wartime, but like it's not a peacetime deficit. And I think that will push up inflation. Tariffs still have this possibility of feed through. The economy is running hot. But what I would say is the American electorate is incredibly fussy. We say the US economy isn't doing great. The US economy did post annualized growth of 4.5% in the third quarter. That is it's a sort of number the European mind cannot comprehend.
Yeah, can you imagine if Rachel Reeves got that?
Imagine if Reeves got 4%.
She'd be
GDP.
celebrating.
Exactly. Keir Starmer would have plus 60. It's I just think that I don't feel I don't sort of pity Trump, but or rather I don't feel bad for Trump, but I do think there is something quite unusual about how demanding the American electorate is when it comes to economic stuff. There are lots of caveats involved here, right? Like unemployment is up, wage growth isn't up, inflation is still higher than target again, and that varies significantly state by state. But GDP growth is strong. It's undeniably strong. And even if you think some of that's down to AI, even if you think some of that's down to sort of tariff-induced funkiness with exports, which it probably is, pharma and gold have been moving about all over the place, and that will make a weird difference. The US economy still is growing pretty strong. I think actually it's in spite of Trump, right? I think the US economy just is remarkably dynamic. I think you sort of see that in the way that it coped with the tariffs. Much as we might not like the Americans, they are quite good at that sort of thing. It turns out, and so I think that it's interesting that doesn't seem to pay any electoral dividend for Trump, right? And if you poll people on what they think of Trump's economy, they hate it at the moment. Yeah. So I just think it's interesting how fussy the American electorate is, right? It was the same thing with the 2024 election, inflation was this massive issue. Inflation peaked at 6% in the US, way down compared to Europe. And it came down, it went up a bit later and came down quicker. So, and yet the Americans were just furious about it. So, I think that there is something weird about the economy, and I don't really know how it'll pan out before the midterms. You can imagine a world where, I don't want to sound too neoliberal, but there's a bit of trickle down from that GDP growth, and, it all pans out okay by November. But equally, so far that doesn't seem to have happened, right? I do think the inflation risks are understated as well. I think that, I don't want to get too boring here, but inflation is already higher than target. It's been quite persistent. Yeah. And the smart people think the tariff feed-throughs are still yet to happen. The dollar is flopping a little bit, and that'll make a difference on the import side of things. And so I do think you can, and inflation expectations are completely de-anchored. So there are definitely tail risks over there. And the Fed, obviously, the assault on the Fed. I think that's what I was going to say. That was the main thing, right? Jerome Powell's out not too soon, and whoever he is replaced by will probably do Trump's bidding and cut interest rates, and you can see how that would end up stoking things. I'm just saying that I think it's weird, the economy. The economy is good, and the US economy, by international standards, in certain respects, is good, especially on GDP growth. Inflation is still higher than it would like to be. And again, unemployment is higher than it was.
Yeah.
But
And I guess that's what matters to a lot of his electorate, a lot of his base, is the kind of how they feel. It's the same thing Biden had, right? Of like, people didn't feel that the economy was good, no matter what they
you see
were
what
told.
I mean? Americans, they're
gonna
very rich.
They're going to be
and
angry
they're
with
very
them,
fussy.
and they're going to be angry with you in the comments too. I'm sure. Ben, let's move down to you. Who is your loser this week?
Well, as I'm on the podcast, I think everyone can tell who I'm moving down, which is Keir Starmer.
No.
In a shocking move. But that's because he's had quite a sort of another disastrous week. So his arch rival, Andy Burnham, who is just for international views, it's the mayor of Greater Manchester, very popular in the north of England, and is frequently cited as a potential successor to Keir Starmer, attempted to put his candidacy forward for a seat that is going to a by-election in the next few weeks of Gorton and Denton in Manchester. Now, Starmer had sort of two options here. He could either allow Burnham to stand, and, Burnham is currently the mayor of Greater Manchester. He's not seeking a Westminster seat to sit on the back benches and to sort of to work with Starmer. It's quite obvious that if he was going to attempt to go to win the by-election, it would be to challenge Starmer for the leadership in a few weeks' time. So Starmer had two options: let him run in the by-election, or he has power via the National Executive Committee, the NEC, to block it. There was discussion from journalists beforehand about whether Starmer would actually block Burnham, and in the end, he did. The NEC voted 8-1 with one abstention to block Burnham. Now, this is it sort of depends how you look at the situation. It's made Starmer more unpopular. There's been so many people frustrated about this, seeing it as like a denial of sort of democracy within the Labour Party, centralised control of the Labour Party, showing that everything that Burnham has said about the Labour Party's approach to governance in the last year has been true, that they're overly protective, that they're not allowing left-wing voices to be heard, all of that. So, it sort of emboldened that opinion. The other side of things, though, is that Starmer was stuck sort of between a rock and a hard place. Either he allows Burnham to stand in that seat, that would have caused a mayoral by-election in Manchester, which, given Reform's strong polling, given the amount of funding that Reform is receiving at the minute, given the sort of Labour membership exodus, there is an argument to be made that Reform could have a very strong showing in that Manchester mayoral by-election. So if you allow Burnham to stand, there's a world in which Labour lose Manchester. And also, there's a very strong chance that Burnham would attempt to take Starmer's job. Or you block him, in which case you probably lose the Gorton and Denton by-election, because you're going to have a candidate. It isn't Andy Burnham standing there. Again, as Reform are polling very strongly, there's a good chance that Reform win there. It was a sort of a difficult decision for him to make. But at the end of the day, any decision he made would have been, to receive backlash for. And he's, yet again, there's more sort of anti-Starmer headlines, and he's polling even worse. So it's not been another good week for Starmer.
Okay, well, as I often explain when we discuss Starmer on this, he cannot drop any further. The board doesn't go any further. He already has a -5 next to his name, which indicates he's been moved down 5 additional times beyond the bottom of the board. Today, that is increasing to 6. So, yeah, fair to say he's not doing great.
Yeah, I would like to just stress on this that I do really think that there wasn't a good thing that he could do here. Every option was bad. And I think the sort of consensus that's forming at the minute is that this was the worst of the two options.
Yeah.
And I just don't think I agree with that. I think that if he had allowed Burnham to stand, there is no world in which Burnham doesn't challenge him for the leadership.
And win.
Were you tempted to put Starmer up?
I don't think so. I think on the whole, this is still not good.
Actually, why aren't you putting because it's still not good?
Well, it's still both.
He's still,
it's the better of the two options. It's still a bad week.
If this game, though, is to assess based on your own political objectives as the leader, he's still Prime Minister.
He is the but that's the loosest of wins.
Yeah, but there's people who lose their elections that were previously at the top of the board. Starmer is the worst politician in the world now by like 5 places.
The point is, the next couple of weeks are like the moment of highest risk, I think, for Starmer, because this has emboldened the sort of the anti-Starmer factions.
Sure.
This has provided them an opportunity to like seize the sort of media momentum against him. So I think it is a moment of high risk. If he manages to get through the next couple of weeks and there doesn't end up being a big sort of like left-wing rebellion to Starmer, then I think this turns out to have been the better of the two strategies.
Sure.
But there is still risk involved in this. It still does give his critics like a stick to hit him with.
He got a lot of sticks already, though.
Yeah, but it's
There's
another
no
stick.
shortage of sticks.
No, I know. But it's never good to hand your opponents yet another stick.
But if the alternative to handing
Stretching
your
the metaphor
opponents
here.
more sticks is you're out of office.
Yeah, again, this is the whole thing about like all options were bad. I don't know. Do you two have
I mean,
you
I
have
was going to
opinions
say,
on this,
I
imagine?
quite like I was quite behind the idea of Starmer letting Burnham stand, Burnham winning, and then Starmer saying, come and join my cabinet. I think that could be a power move. Either you give him a really...
Inside the tent.
Yeah, either you bring him in and hopefully his popularity lifts your government up slightly. Don't know if that would happen. Or if you really are trying to sink him, you give him a really difficult cabinet role that hopefully would...
I think that strategy has been tried before with
Yeah,
things like
keep your
Boris
enemies
Johnson.
close.
And you keep your enemies close, but they're still keeping an eye on polls and events. Like maybe he does get given a cabinet position, but then when they lose the local elections, Scottish elections, Welsh elections, does he not then go,
But
maybe...
this is the thing. I think whether Burnham's in or out of Westminster, I think Starmer's going to be challenged after May.
Yeah, but I think he's got much less of a chance of succeeding against Burnham.
Possibly. Yeah.
Like if it's Wes Streeting, I think Starmer has more of a chance of beating him.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm quite just pessimistic about his chances of
Yeah,
beating
that's
anyone. Especially you can imagine if the Greens win this by-election, you could imagine someone taking a sort of more left of Labour approach, challenging Starmer effectively. Whereas if Reform win, maybe someone sort of more Wes Streeting type might be a strong challenger. I think whatever route you take through the possible outcomes of the next few months, by-election, local election, sort of national and local elections, I think they all sort of end in Starmer leaving.
I just think if you're a Labour MP looking at the polls at the minute and you saw what happened with the Conservatives when they switched their leaders out loads, you sort of know that you maybe have one leadership change in you. And do you really want to pull the trigger on that for Wes Streeting, who isn't that different to Starmer?
I don't think Wes Streeting would.
But do you really think that you have more of a chance of keeping your seat in the next election with Wes Streeting?
On that turn of phrase, turn the ship around, what, as in politically? Or like the whole ship of state, as in make the country better?
I think probably both. As in, I don't think Labour would have some kind of massive renaissance under Wes Streeting premiership.
I also think just a lot of MPs will look at that as well. I think they know they probably have one leadership change in them, and if they're going to do it, they might as well go for someone a bit different.
I'm just thinking about this. I actually think because of the turn of the ship of state around thing that made me think, I think that there's a silver lining here for Starmer as well, and it's sort of, I'm thinking about Burnham, and the one sort of vulnerability I think Burnham has is that the markets don't like him. Trust me to go for that, but he keeps on saying stuff about like you shouldn't be
a hock to
the bond markets, and bond markets it's not really how it works, right? Like we just do borrow internationally unless you want to make some massive changes to how we operationalize monetary policy and use the Bank of England. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. We rely on international credit markets.
Also, didn't the markets react badly to that statement by Burnham?
Yeah, no, they did. They did react badly.
We're coming to the conclusion that we should be moving Starmer up.
And I do think it's a real risk for him. I would also say that on that note, I think there are green shoots in the British economy at the moment. In that there's been a whole load of like data releases recently. We do the monthly GDP stuff that came in well above target, 0.3%, which is pretty good. Month on month, right? Yeah. Our bond yields, we're all panicking. Bond yields are super high. Remember that? Bond yields, British bond yields are now basically on a par with everyone else's, if not a bit lower, which is very nice. Everyone else is going up. The Japanese, big trouble. Us,
it's amazing
in the money.
To celebrate when the bond markets have gone back to normal as a win.
It's massive, absolutely massive. Honestly, we've had elevated borrowing costs since this trust. No. That's great. We've done trust. There are various sort of like manufacturing and service indices that are finally ticking up positive. The pound is up against the the dollar strongest, I think, since at least 2022.
I think that might have.
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably
No,
the other
no,
side.
if you
though, right?
compare, we're still doing up against the euro. Like the
a
FTSE,
basket of currencies.
the borrowing came in lower than forecast for the first time in months. The other way. I just do think that there's a. I'm not saying he's going to turn things around electorally, but I do think there are genuinely really quite good green shoots in the UK economy at the moment, and it speaks to this thing that my sort of basic optimism has always been that actually, honestly, all the UK needed was like a tiny bit of peace and quiet, and the economy is actually good. And we finally had a bit of piss and quiet. Piss and quiet? Peace and quiet. If by accident. And the UK economy seems to be sorting itself out a little bit, right? You know, just a little bit of political stability, even for just a year since the budget. And
But
things
we're
finally...
clearly so used to changing prime ministers that we're bored of political stability, and we want to
Yeah,
change
exactly.
it
Yeah.
again. Yeah.
No, I'm just feeling quietly very optimistic about the UK economy at the moment.
Really?
I mean, incredibly optimistic.
About
5%
Starmer too,
GDP
or do you
growth.
think Starmer is so damaged that like even were he to like flaunt great numbers, everyone would be like, oh, shut up.
I think he's so damaged.
Yeah.
I think he's too damaged, which is a shame. But
So
I don't know
then-
how we quietly change him out for someone a bit more charming. I mean, I
Well, yeah,
think
then is the advantage then to bring someone else in, Burnham,
what I would hope, I think the
and
best
then
way
he
that
can take credit for it.
from a country/Labour perspective, I think the best way this goes is that we have a few more months. The economy really does start to stabilise. Andy stops saying stuff, dissing the bond markets because we don't need to diss the bond markets anymore. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
And then, he comes in as a vibe shift and not necessarily a massive policy shift, appoints, maybe he keeps Rachel Reeves, although I don't think that's going to happen. But, basically... The economy starts doing well enough that he doesn't have to signal to the Labour membership that he's going to do some massive left-wing pivot on economic policy. And then he just gets to sort of take credit for a sort of like normal economy and probably wins the next election.
Okay.
I think that's the best outcome. Like, I think of it, let's just say maybe later this year,
We'll keep an
the
eye on
Andy
it.
Burnham
It's just-
iceberg finally arrives.
Yeah.
And
It's just the mechanism for him to get there.
the bloody
Like,
mechanism.
it's
It's always
so-
the mechanism.
But like, he needs a by-election in Manchester. This was like the easiest and sort of cleanest route, and I don't see how
Oh, and if he's
There
not
was- there was
there
a- there was a-
anymore,
there was a-
then they don't get to vote, right?
there was.
Or do they still vote?
What do you mean?
The NEC.
Yeah.
Oh, the NEC. Oh, yeah, the NEC couldn't block him via the same mechanism they just have, but they still have a say over candidate selection more generally. So there would still be a way for them
Sneaky.
to block him. But apparently there was a deal proposed to Burnham that he could have a seat closer to the Manchester mayoral by-election next year. And Starmer sort of offered him that. And I think that was to give Starmer sort of time.
Okay.
But that was rejected.
That might
Sneaky.
be my ideal outcome then. He might...
Everyone's a winner.
Yeah, he might
Everyone
turn up
moves
in a
up
year's
on the
time.
board.
The economy's already booming. There you go.
Okay, Starmer has moved down to negative
After all
6 after all of that. Let's move on to our final loser of the week. Zach, who is your loser?
My loser of the week is the leader of the Taliban, Hibatullah Akhundzada, I think.
Perfect. Very well said. And from your own notes.
Thank you very much. He's going down for basically two reasons. The first is, and I'll do it chronologically, the first is that over the past couple of months, there have been a number of skirmishes on the Tajikistan-Afghanistan border between basically Tajik security agents and members of the Taliban. There are occasional sort of border disagreements along that border, but it's not really clear what's kicking everything off. But I think this doesn't bode well for the Taliban because they are now they now have border-related tensions with at least three of their neighbors: Pakistan, Iran, and now Tajikistan. And that's not really that surprising, but I think that it's probably not a great thing when you're sort of quietly at war with all your neighbors. And the other thing, and me and Rory talked about this in the office a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a week ago.
Yeah.
But there's a report in the BBC. It's hard to find other reports. There's not that much sort of Afghan news going around. But that basically there's been a sort of factional split within the Taliban. There've always been sort of at least two, there are actually lots of factions within the Taliban, which is one of the reasons, by the way, that Pakistan has such a difficult time negotiating with them over the TPP, which is the sort of Pakistani Taliban, because they say, can you do more to keep a lid on these guys? And one faction Taliban goes, yeah, of course, and the other one goes, well, no. And so Pakistan are left sort of, they have no idea what to do.
Yeah.
And anyway, there's at least a couple of factions, but the two of the main factions have sort of fallen out with one another. There is a sort of more conservative hardline faction in Kandahar, which is basically Afghanistan's second city. And then there is the sort of like current leadership led by that guy in Kabul. And well, according to the reports, the sort of contingent in Kandahar wants to pursue a more sort of hardline Islamist-inspired vision of Taliban rule, whereas the faction in Kabul, it's not necessarily like they're not liberals in any sense, but it's both that they want to pursue a relatively liberal domestic policy, but also they want to improve relations in their sort of like neighborhood. You know, they want to make more of an effort with, you know, to basically mend ties with all those various neighbors. And I think that's mainly motivated by economic anxieties. At the moment, obviously, the Afghan economy is in a real state and has been, well, for a very, very long time. But there is a bit of an economic boom happening in all those sort of Central Asian countries on Afghanistan's like northern borders that would normally be their biggest trading partners, right? And I think that they would like to sort of piggyback off of that. But anyway, I think there's the two things: yet another border conflict for Afghanistan and a sort of factional split. So not great for the Taliban.
Pretty bad for the Taliban.
Yeah, tough.
He is being added to the board, though. He was previously on the board, then he was purged at the end of last year and very quickly brought back.
Yeah.
So as a new addition, he's being added to the lightly negative section of the board, and we'll see where he goes in the future.
Can I say, I've just realised one other thing that might put him down is that, and it's something Georgie talked about a while ago, a couple of podcasts ago, but there has been a real move towards Central Asian integration, right, between all those states. And I think that also bodes ill for the Taliban because they have loads of outstanding disagreements over like security and water supplies, right? And they've still been able to get away with it by not deliberately playing off those Central Asian countries against one another, but the fact there was no sort of coordinated pushback, right?
Yeah.
And that as you see this sort of like political deepening in Central Asia, you can imagine a more coordinated pushback against those disagreements, those points of disagreement.
Okay. Those are our losers this week. And before we move on to the next section, we have our mini game.
Yeah.
And the minigame's back. The minigame is back for one last time because the magnets are back for one last time. This is your final week in order to order the World Leader Leaderboard magnets. Due to us moving over to our new logistics solution, for various boring reasons, it makes no sense for us to continue selling the magnets. So they got to go. If there's any left, I don't know what we're going to do with pick like magnets of Xi Jinping, but we'll have to find a use for them. So if you would like a set of our magnets, if you've been thinking about it, they are 40% off right now using the code FIRESALE, and this is your last week. They will be going from the store in a week's time. So make sure you get them now. That being said, let's demonstrate how fun the magnets are via our mini game. The way this works is both Ben and Zach will be working together to rank world leaders on a different metric to normal. We are going back to the first ever question we had on this game. We're going full circle as it's the final one. And I am asking you to decide on your ranking of the world leaders you would most and least like to take home to meet your parents, which was the one that Rory did in week one. So if you take the board, and then Rory, you're allowed to choose the 5 people they are ranking.
Are they ranking sort of, they're trying to agree?
They have to reach a consensus, yes.
It's going to be a very long mini game. When you say meet the parents, is it like we're dating?
Yeah.
Bringing him back?
Yeah.
That's good.
I think also in this hypothetical, they don't know who he is, or she.
So they don't know that
it's not like
the French president.
Yeah, I think you're kind of imagining Xi Jinping as just like someone you met at university. They're not like
this is
the leader.
I've got to say, difficult to imagine.
This is also more detail than I had when I was doing mine.
I just thought about it more. So
it's literally just like
vibes.
the person.
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
Okay,
but I think
and they are your date.
But the vibes you're getting from Xi Jinping are kind of downstream of their politics, right? Like you don't know Xi on a personal level, so like it is about them as a person, but like. Hard to extrapolate too far.
So this is like you bring them back as a partner.
Yes.
And who's going to make the best impression?
Exactly right.
Okay.
So your options are Mark Rutte.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to pile up there. Emmanuel Macron, Xi Jinping, Erdogan, Recep Erdogan,
That would be awkward, I gotta say. He's a big starer.
and Claudia Scheinbaum.
I think there's one that I'm already saying should be at the top there.
Who?
I think Rutte.
You think Russ?
That's
I think he's
crazy.
There's a real risk that he calls your dad daddy, though.
I know,
I think
he'd be
Russell-
so sickly. Do you know what I mean?
I know.
He seems,
Oh,
he
this
seems
is the
quite
most
chill.
amazing meal I've ever had. Oh, wow, Mr. and Mrs. Michaelis. It'd be frustrating. I hate it.
Well,
Macron, I think, would genuinely be the most charming.
I
Or
was going to say,
Scheinbaum.
I genuinely think Macron would be near the bottom for me.
Wow.
Can
I
you
just
back
think
me
he's
up here?
quite-
Surely Macron would be
I think
relatively
Macron was
near the
top of my list.
Yeah, he's
when I did it.
certainly
so
relatively
that's
high.
That's that.
So Scheinbaum, where would you put Scheinbaum's higher?
Well, it doesn't really
Scheinbaum
matter
is
what I
high.
think at
I
this
think-
point.
No,
She-
that's
yeah,
true.
she's
but
gotta
let's
be
just for formality's
towards the top.
sake. She would be quite. Come on, charming.
I mean, yeah, fine.
of the you would put. So
I'm certainly above she and Erdogan, yeah.
I
What
think
about Rutte?
So
Well, Rutte's at the top. for
Sure.
me, So,
so okay, I'll give you Rutte. You want Rutte second?
no, let's do Scheinbaum. So I'll
He's at the top for you.
I know, but
Now he's at the
I'm compromising.
Okay.
And then
How about you put
Compromise.
Scheinbaum at the top as a true compromise? Both of your second place.
No, I think. Oh, actually, she is very. You know what? That's a fair point. I'll take that. Let's switch around. I think Scheinbaum probably would be. I think Macron has. It probably launch into a rant about strategic autonomy.
This
He's
is
a
it.
It
big
could get a bit
He's-
spiky, I think.
Yeah, although you know,
Also, he's been quite rude on a number of situations. I just feel like he could be quite rude.
yeah, that's true. We might call
He's
him Manu
coming in.
by
Yeah,
mistake.
exactly. He called him Manu, and he'll insist on being called Mr. President.
I
So-
think Erdogan has to go at the bottom.
Erdogan
He's quite a
OG.
scary fella. I don't know if you've seen interviews with Erdogan, but he's quite scary and fiery.
Yeah,
You know, he doesn't go to Davos anymore. But have you seen that rant?
No.
Oh, when he was
2009,
in, with the Israeli
president.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't get on great for obvious reasons, but
Yeah.
he's spicy. So can I put him at the bottom?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, I don't no disrespect Recep, but he's just I don't want to come at me, but he is quite scary. I think Xi, I actually think Xi. I feel that sort of isn't fair to him. I think he would be very not charming, but very polite,
Yeah.
and it'd be very inoffensive. I can imagine
In
he
a way
wouldn't
that,
embarrass himself like Rutte might.
or Emmanuel Macron might.
That's true. Maybe Xi should go.
I'm actually tempted.
But what if someone mentioned Xinjiang by mistake?
Yeah, that could
Yeah.
Yeah, that gets spicy.
yeah.
Okay, do you want to show us your board and run us through your order quick?
Although that's probably true of Erdogan as well with the Kurds, but
There's loads
There's-
of stuff.
there's some
Erdogan,
hot
there's
points from
tons
all of
of
them.
stuff. You could, there's loads of mine. It's a
Run us through
minefield.
your ranking.
We're going Scheinbaum top.
Mhm.
We just think seems a very nice
We.
person. They're going Macron second
Mhm.
because nice, but if not a bit arrogant and a bit ranty.
Yeah.
he'd have been. I think he should be lower.
Rutte, he's going third, sickly. Yeah. They're such a sycophant. It would be, and also we're quite English. Our parents, your parents presumably wouldn't like someone who's that obviously
No,
sucking up.
but
to
I
them.
also don't think they'd particularly like Macron coming in with all the sort of bravado.
The bravado.
I think he's quite arrogant at times.
I've got more.
He's just French.
Yeah, he's just French. I've got a more
Either
European
yeah,
family
well, this
than
is
you
true.
do.
This is true.
Xi, a bit unfair, polite, but I don't know if he's going to make an impression.
Yeah.
Probably not the one to put a ring on it. And Erdogan does really scare me. Have you seen that video of him at the polling station?
Why are you watching so many videos of Erdogan getting
I do
angry?
lots of Turkey
What is
videos.
your algorithm?
It's not him getting angry. He just does. There's a video of him at the polling station in the last election where he just sort of like, normally people come to polling station, world leaders, and they do like a big, oh, hello.
Yeah.
He just sort of edges in silently behind people like a sort of vampire.
He does have vampire vibes.
He does have
actually,
vampire
the way he
vibes. And then they
moves.
sort of
Yeah.
like, the people can sort of sense a presence behind him because he's quite tall and he's sort of like linger over them. And they sort of turn over, oh! And it's just, your president line up at the polling station and be like, no, you go first. It's
that
just,
is- yeah.
it's just spooky.
Yeah. You don't need that one. You're serving up dinner and he's
Yeah.
lunging behind you.
He doesn't really lunge. He's quite slow, but
Okay.
he's quite sinister at the same time.
Well,
I'm sorry, we're getting rid of this section.
yeah. That is the final mini game, and also your final opportunity to buy the magnets themselves. Use the code FIRESALE at
Quite Boris
checkout.
Johnson. If
It
you
was. I didn't. 40% off using code FIRESALE this week only, because after this week, we're going to be sending the team home with hundreds of Mark Rutte magnets.
Fridge is going to be covered.
It's going to be crazy. So head to the store and pick them up today. Every week, we let you decide one person that we discuss in the episode, and we will decide based on your suggestion if they're a winner or a loser this week. This week, the audience chose Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, currently in the positive section of the board. So he will stay vaguely at the top, but are we moving him up or down? Rory?
I think he's got to move up. The last few weeks, he's been on a bit of a blitz.
He's on fire.
Really, on the world stage, he's having his moment. The Davos speech was obviously the big one, where he sort of, I don't know how to describe it, he sort of announced this new world order, this post-American order, and sort of called on middle powers to work their way through together. And I think, that speech really like set every political sort of commentator and analyst off on a sort of like Mark Carney hype train. So I think he can go up for that. But I think he's also sort of, I was going to say consolidated his power domestically, but that sounds a bit authoritarian. His Liberal Party doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And I think he's just in a very good position.
Yeah.
And like Scheinbaum, we've talked about as a sort of possible inspiration for left-wing parties around the world. Carney's sort of putting himself out there as an example that other leaders might want to follow in terms of pragmatic foreign policy, like his sort of turn towards China and challenging the US, that kind of thing. I think he's trying to set himself up as a future world leader. Leader of the world.
Wow. Yeah. That's what Starmer could have been. Yeah. Zach?
Yeah, I totally agree. I would say that speech, I actually had a hard time. He talked about this, the Black, is it Black Club Harwell, that book that I'm referencing?
Yeah.
And having the sign in the window, and then we're taking the sign down. I didn't really understand that metaphor. Maybe someone can explain it to me, because he seemed to be implying that originally Canada was it was sort of being disingenuous about its commitment to the rules-based order, or like accepting some of the hypocrisy, and now that it's not accepting the hypocrisy, but I didn't think that's really the point he was trying to make. Anyway, I think that metaphor was a bit mixed. That's my feedback to him, basically. And I think you shouldn't shoehorn Harvard into your political speech, is general takeaway. But I do think that, obviously, great speech. Aside from that, I do think there was one other tension, and I think this is a more general issue for these quote-unquote middle powers. We talked about this in the office again, but at times he was talking about building up these sort of like balancing alliances, right? Like sort of creating this network of middle powers that could push back against the hegemons, to use Carney's language. But then also and then other times he was talking about how the rules-based order is dead and all that sort of thing. But other times he was sort of paying lip service to the importance of the UN and stuff like that. And I do think there was this tension here, right? Is that as a middle power, do you try and revive existing multilateral orders like the UN? Do you try and sort of invest political capital in them? Or do you sort of go for the sort of pure realpolitik sort of, let's create our own network of alliances that's just in hard power terms, sufficiently strong to balance out against hegemons? So I think that that's an interesting tension. And, I think that middle powers do have to decide what they're going to go for there, right? Like, do we still think it's worth trying to keep the UN alive, for instance? The other thing I was going to say is that, on the whole centrist thing, I do think it's interesting that it's not, I think everyone says centrism is dead, that sort of thing. And you look at Starmer, you look at Macron, and you go, oh God, that's miserable. I think it just turns out that actually, no, they're just rubbish politicians. Like if you're a competent politician, you can be a quote unquote centrist. Carney is helped by the fact that Pierre Poilievre is incredibly unpopular. Obviously, Trump is the bogeyman in Canadian politics. But I do think that the lesson is not that sort of like centrism or technocracy is dead. It's that actually we've got bad technocrats and centrists at the moment in lots of other countries. The last thing I'll say is, I think that's a couple of weeks ago, is that I do think this just goes to the point that central bankers are great politicians. They just are so good at it. And it speaks to the fact that you look tired, as I said that.
Exhausted by
it speaks to the fact that, being a central banker has actually always been, a bit of a political position. There's never been a strict delineation between fiscal and monetary policy, as sometimes we pretend there is. There are degrees of independence for central banks, but there's no such thing as total independence. And I just do think that I was thinking about it. Mario Draghi is obviously the other example, right? Most popular Italian politician, years, incredibly successful at coalition management. But I was also thinking, Christine Lagarde is in some sense a political figure. You can imagine her winning a landslide.
Yeah.
So I just think that is another interesting thing. I do think that it's in some sense betrays the innate the political element of being a central banker. That makes sense.
Sure.
Fair. Sure.
I get it.
Yeah.
Ben.
Yeah, I also think he's sort of anti-Trump sort of position. He's taken a very different strategy with Trump to Starmer over the last sort of year. And I think with everything that happened with Greenland in the end, I think he was sort of vindicated on that. And you're starting to see politicians change tack with Trump as a result. And I'm not saying that was solely him, but he was certainly in that category of politicians that took sort of a harsher tone with Trump. And it just seems that is the way to manage him. And that's the way to best sort of protect your national interests. And he's been vindicated in that matter. And the evidence of that is politicians like Starmer attempting things differently.
Carney, a winner then this week, moving up to the very positive section of the board, right at the very top. Let us know who you want us to discuss next week, either someone who's already on the board or a new addition, by posting it in the comments. The most liked comment within reason will be the one that we discuss in next week's episode, so make sure to submit them now. Let's move on to our other winners of the week. Rory, let's come back to you. It's been a while. Who is your winner this week?
My winner of the week is Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, who's already way up at the top of the board, and she's going to get a little +1. This is after a recent summit she had in Rome with Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, that I think sort of solidified this German-Italian sort of duo.
I was going to say axis.
I have axis written down here and I regret writing it. I really tried to think of another word. German-Italian duo on the European stage, with Meloni emerging sort of as a key partner of Merz and sort of replacing Macron in that respect. So they signed this sort of joint action plan for Europe, they call it, which, I mean, a lot of it is actually kind of unsurprising because they're both sort of right-wing leaders. They were calling for deregulation, sort of pro-industry measures, competitiveness, that kind of thing. They're opposed to for example, the ban on combustion engine vehicles after 2035 in the EU. So a lot of it is sort of unsurprising, but I think what is interesting is that it sort of showed that Italy's position in Europe has changed quite a bit. You look at the 2010s when it was really unstable. It had, I don't know how many prime ministers, maybe even into double digits, maybe not quite that high, but more than 5, where it's sort of seen as one of these Southern European irresponsible countries that needed managing by the sort of Germans and the other sort of frugal Northern European countries. But now it's sort of being treated like an equal with Merz and Meloni as sort of co-equals in this partnership. And I think it's quite a significant change. And part of that is because Meloni has brought stability to Italian politics. She's been in for 3 years now, still polling well with an election next year. And that is why sort of Macron is becoming a less favoured partner for Merz, because he just doesn't really have any room for manoeuvre, and he's going to be gone next year anyway. And also because France and Germany have had all these issues recently over the Mercosur trade deal. There's a joint fighter jet program that just has been stalled for years because they can't agree on who's going to do what part of it, and various other sort of differences in approach to everything from industrial strategy to trade and that kind of thing. So I think Meloni, another thing I should say, after the last few years, Meloni had already established herself as a sort of key player on things like migration at the EU level. But that's sort of not surprising because of where Italy is. It's one of these sort of states on the periphery, has a lot of people coming in through that route. So naturally, it's going to be a key player when it comes to migration. But the fact that Merz has teamed up with Meloni to create this sort of like pro-industry front within the EU, I think shows that she's being taken seriously as a player in other fields as well. And the two of them are going to go to this EU leaders retreat, I think they call it, next month to try and push this agenda. So that will be an interesting test to see how effective they are in that. Yeah. But yeah, she's a winner of the week for me.
Okay, as you mentioned, Meloni's already at the top of the board, so she's getting a +1. There's a fair few +1s up there now. Obviously, Merz is also a big part of this. He's not moving up this week and is in fact like pretty low on the board.
Yeah.
Do we think this is a good sign for Germany too, or is this mainly an indication of kind of Italian success?
Yeah, I mean, it's good for Merz that he has sort of found a partner who he can join with and try and push this sort of industrial deregulation kind of agenda. But I don't think that summit really reflects much about Germany's positioning. It reflects more about Maloney's. I mean, Merz, by proxy, he probably could move up because of recent successes on things like the Mercosur trade deal being approved, but then that's been slightly scuppered by it being referred to the Court of Justice, which delays things. But I think his approach is more sort of in favour among the European capitals than the sort of Macron approach. So he's on the up for that reason, I suppose, as well. But I think if we just talk about the summit, it's Maloney that comes out of it as a sort of winner rather than him, I think.
Ben, let's jump down to you. Who's your winner this week?
So my winner is Mette Frederiksen. Now, this is all obviously centered around what's happened in Greenland in the last couple of weeks. So as I mentioned when we were talking about Carney, there's this number of world leaders who their approach to Trump has been sort of pushing back and not trying to appease, which stands in contrast, again, very clearly to countries like the UK that has really tried to sort of suck up to him. Even prior to this year and the sort of discussions around Greenland, Frederiksen had a number of sort of tense phone calls, even sort of around the inauguration last year, but also prior to that in his first term. So yeah, her approach is similar to that of world leaders like Carney, where it's sort of actually trying to stand up and speak out against him. With the most recent sort of crisis surrounding Greenland, her approach had been to try and rally European leaders around her cause. We managed to get like a coalition of the willing, I suppose is the phrase they used, with Britain, Germany, France, Iceland, sending a small number of troops as essentially as like a deterrent to try and get the Americans to sort of lay their hands off Greenland, and to show that if they did want to take it, they'd have to sort of go against a number of their sort of traditional allies. So getting that was quite a significant thing, but also getting sort of the statements out of European leaders who had previously tried to appease Trump was also quite a big success. I know that, earlier this year, it looked a little bit sort of sketchy, I suppose, for it. It looked like Trump might press ahead with Greenland, might resort to military force. But obviously, we saw at that Davos speech him confirming that they not only wouldn't use military force, but also then suggesting that, the status quo would basically be kept the same. They're not going to attempt to try and completely seize Greenland in the way that some had assumed. Sort of showed that her strategy had worked, and that is the way to deal with Trump, is to sort of stand up to him a bit more. And not only has that meant that the Greenland issue, at least at the minute, seems sort of resolved, but it also has helped her domestically. There's an election this year in Denmark, and her polling has ticked up about 2 or 3 points as a result of the last couple of weeks with Greenland. And again, it goes back to what I was sort of saying with Carney, which is that it seems like the strategy of just trying to give Trump what he wants and trying to buddy up to him just doesn't work. And I think that this is going to set the tone for other world leaders in the next few months and years with their approach to the US.
Absolutely. Mette Frederiksen moving from the negative section to the lightly negative section, an increasingly crowded spot there in lightly negative. What do we think more broadly about this kind of, I'm interested in both of you as well, this kind of shift in tenor towards Trump, the kind of, as Ben says, world leaders, I mean, not everyone was sucking up to him at the beginning, but certainly most Europeans were. And I mean, in the Greenland issue in particular, they stood up to him, but also, as has been reflected more broadly, I think there is more resistance towards Trump and more pushback. Do we think we can expect to see a more kind of muscular European response going forward? Or is this purely an instance of like, it looked like they were going to invade a European country essentially, so you kind of have to step up, and then when it goes back to kind of less existential things, they'll kind of go back to old ways?
I think there has been a genuine shift in European thinking about America. And I think on that particular, on the question of like how you approach Trump, broadly speaking, you have two strategies. You have appeasement and you have like a more sort of confrontational approach. I think what the last year has shown basically is that confronting Trump doesn't always work, right? He retaliates a lot. But it's just probably better than appeasing, because even if you try and appease him, he normally just comes back and asks for more later, right? And that became, I think, obviously very evident in the first sort of post-Liberation Day skirmishes, where the Chinese pushed back very, very hard, and obviously China has way more leverage than basically any other country, right? But I do think that people sort of learned from that actually, it was a tentative data point to suggest that actually pushing back against Trump is the right strategy. And I think countries that have appeased Trump, like the UK, have quite quickly realized that you might be able to sort of get his attention off you for a little bit, but you don't really achieve much in policy terms, and he normally does come back asking for more.
He also sort of expects more than he gives. Like the UK required sort of persistent rhetorical support for Trump, and in the end, we didn't get hit with the hardest of tariffs on Liberation Day, but there was still tariffs, and Starmer was clearly hoping that we'd avoid all tariffs, and that didn't happen. We didn't achieve a full free trade agreement, which was what numerous prime ministers had been hoping and what Starmer had been hoping. There was some dropping of sort of sector-specific tariffs, but nothing that sort of comprehensive. It seems like the Starmer approach of trying, it felt like we've had to give more to not actually get that much. And the minute Starmer spoke out against him on Greenland, it was like, right, tariffs, like straight in there. Anything that had preceded that didn't seem to count for anything. It didn't seem to count for much at all.
Yeah.
And that's on top of the sort of, the second state visit that no presidents had, and, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it does feel like you have to give more than you're going to get back in these things, at least from the UK's experience.
I think that's sort of noticeable that that's just reflects the power imbalance, right? That like in any negotiation with an extractive hegemon, you're going to have to give up more than you. I mean, one of the things I would say,
was hoping for more.
Yeah, no, I don't actually know. I think that Starmer was pretty happy with the trade deal he ended up getting. I mean, they were obviously pushing for more in certain sectors, but they did tout it as a triumph. I would say one of the things I think in retrospect is that I do think the read on all this, by the way, is that the one thing Trump has always cared about is the king. He just does love the king. I think, by the way, that the U-turn on the British soldiers, that should be seen as a king thing, right? Because the king is our commander-in-chief, and I reckon he probably signaled, I'm not too happy about that. And that's why we got a U-turn, no one else did. And I do think in retrospect...
Do you reckon the king threatened not to go to Trump's birthday?
Good point.
He's going the 250th. Do you reckon he said...
Oh my God!
Maybe we just send the king in to do negotiations.
We honestly should. I mean, I think we gave up our one bit of leverage, which was a second state visit, way too early.
Agreed.
Is that this talk of? Well, people say that it shouldn't happen now, but I don't know if that's no. People say we should sort of backtrack on that and not bring him over for another state visit. But do you know if that is actually going to happen? Yeah,
to backtrack. But I think we gave it. We got 4 years.
Yeah, it was like it was so early on, and he was like, "I've got a letter for you."
Yeah, I know. So I think that was genuinely that was one of the few things. I think the people who have leverage over Trump are China with rare earths and us with the king. And we played our card way too early.
At least he likes the king. We swapped out our monarch between his terms. Swapped out maybe isn't quite right. You know what I mean? But
swapped out. Yeah.
He just likes the monarchy. He could have just been a Queen fan, but turns out the king will do.
What do you mean? What's your point?
Well, we're lucky that the king still works.
Still
I get
works.
what you're saying.
As in
maybe Trump just like the monarchy because of
just
the Queen.
like the Queen.
But it turns out he still likes the king.
It's not her that he likes.
No.
It's the big houses and the hats.
Yeah. There were reports that the Danes were considering. Was it the Danes were considering sending in their king, who used to be a Marine,
idea.
plonk him in Greenland?
Some more kings about.
Yeah, we got to use our kings. Actually, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Get all of the European royals together.
Put a big sort of dinner on for him.
A big dinner on, but not. We'll offer it and we'll say no, but you have to give us this thing first.
Okay, let's move on to our final winner of the week. Zach, who is that?
Oh, my winner of the week is Vietnam's leader, To Lam, who just secured, so every 5 years, the Vietnamese Communist Party holds a sort of like party congress, and he just secured another 5 years as the sort of chairman of the Vietnamese Communist Party. But unlike in China, where these positions emerged, Vietnam also has a presidential role, and there were strong signals that he was also considering sort of becoming the president and folding those two roles into one. So consolidation of power, that's good for him. But the other thing is that, and he sort of mentioned this in some of the speeches he gave around that time, is that the Vietnamese economy is genuinely just booming. So Vietnam has experienced sort of GDP growth rates between averaging 8% the last couple of years. He wants to take that to 10%. It's not a rich country yet. You know, GDP per capita is about $4,000-5,000. You know, it's a third out of China, for instance, something like that. But yeah, I mean, he's very, very optimistic about the future growth rates. And basically, you know, Vietnam has benefited from the fact that it is benefiting from a couple of things. I mean, one, it's just very close to China, right? And lots of sort of like nearby Southeast Asian countries have sort of seen like this sort of, they've enjoyed those headwinds, right? But also it has emerged as a sort of like, it's basically like a get around in some ways for Chinese companies exporting to America, right? There was this trade deal that Trump signed with Vietnam. Was low, I can't remember exactly what the tariff rate was, but it's around 20%, I think, which is lower obviously than what was hit on China. And there was this clause in it about transshipments, right, which was clearly aimed at preventing Chinese companies from basically rerouting exports via Vietnam to enjoy a lower tariff rate when they go into the US. But it has, unsurprisingly, basically given how thin that trade deal was, proved very hard to enforce. It's not just because transshipments are like really hard to enforce in the first place, right? Like you've got to trust the paperwork. Yeah. But also because like they didn't really, it's not the trade system, the global trade system is not that simple anymore. You know, it's not like the literally Chinese exporters are shifting it through Vietnam. It's that Chinese exporters set up companies in Vietnam, you know, stuff's constructed, you know, there's supply chains that cross that border many, many times. So sort of identifying whether or not it's a Chinese or Vietnamese export is very, very difficult, right? So Vietnam has benefited from that. I also think that To Lam has, well, him and his predecessor have done a very good job actually balancing relations between China and the US. You know, they enjoy good relations with sort of both superpowers, which puts them in a uniquely sort of like advantageous position. And yeah, I think that things are looking pretty up. And the Vietnamese economy genuinely is, you know, it's a bit of a miracle at the moment. And it's quickly becoming, in sort of aggregate terms, one of the rich countries in the region.
Okay, To Lam moving up from the lightly positive to the fully positive section. Is the economic strength something they can rely on kind of going forward, or is it a case of like once tariffs have been potentially rolled back post-Trump in a few years' time, that status quo could resume, or are they taking steps to ensure that it's kind of more of a long-term success, do you think?
I mean, yes. Well, I think you've got to, I mean, it's very, I'm not fully an expert in this, but the playbook does seem to be basically copying and pasting what happened to China in the early 2000s, right? So sort of like a controlled expansion of the private sector coupled with massive and not sector-specific infrastructure investment, right? So just enormous amounts of spending on infrastructure in the same way that China started doing in the 2000s and 2010s. You're sort of like preempting your growth, right? You're sort of like creating infrastructure for a more developed economy and hoping that you sort of like catch up to that, right? And yeah, I think that, but I think also just plus the fact that lots of countries in that region are just benefiting from like, the Southeast Asian economies are just doing well. They are, you know, it's in part a China story, but it is also just that, you know, Vietnam and those nearby countries have enjoyed pretty strong growth rates for a pretty long time.
Yeah, and I mean, even if some of these steps taken by Chinese companies are rolled back in a few years' time, it's kind of exactly what happened with China, with American companies coming in, teaching them how to do all these things, and then they slowly built their own upstarts and were able to do it. Like companies like Apple are moving production into Vietnam, and there's no reason to think that would necessarily roll back, especially as kind of the worker pool is upskilling and all those kind of things.
So one of the other good signs is that Vietnam has actually enjoyed genuine wage growth, right? Is no longer just like a cheap wage destination, right, for manufacturers. It is also a skilled labor. It's got a skilled labor force essentially that is moving up the value chain.
Okay, so those are our winners and losers for the week. But before we close, we need to quickly decide on our ultimate winners and ultimate losers. Okay, so the way this works is we now each get to vote for the ultimate winner and ultimate loser of the week. And if we have 3 out of 4 of us agreeing, then that person moves an additional spot up or down. Your options for ultimate loser this week are Trump, Starmer, and Akhundzada Adda. You can write the Taliban leader if you want. Okay, Ben, let's start with you. Who's your ultimate loser?
My ultimate loser is Donald Trump.
Same.
Oh, clean sweep.
No
more than we
go.
needed.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's been a pretty rough week for him. And I mean, reflected on the board, he's moving down to the fully negative section. Sorry. And then finally, our ultimate winner of the week, you have Maloney, Meta Friedrichsen, To Lam, and of course, Mark Carney is also an option from the audience section. Okay, Ben, start with you again. Who is your ultimate winner this week?
My ultimate winner is Mark Carney.
Same. I was tempted with Meta Fredrickson for the pole boost, but
I was tempted by Toe Lamb in the end, I'm afraid.
I also went Tolam.
oh, I'm surprised I got you on Tolam.
Yeah.
So we haven't reached an agreement there, and as such, no one moves up again. So this is how the leaderboard looks right now at the end of the episode. Make sure you let us know who you want us to talk about in the audience section of next week's video. Chuck that in the comments and like other people's comments you agree with. Other than that, we'll be back again next week. Don't forget the magnets, because you're never going to get a chance to do it again. Fire sale, 40% off. Come on, get your magnets. That's compelling, right?
Yeah.